All right, tonight we're down chapter 8 and in verse 1. Now, last week we pointed out in introducing us to this that the purpose of chapter 7 is to show the superiority of Christ's priesthood over Aaron's. And now then, in chapter 8, the purpose here is the conclusion of Christ's priesthood over Aaron. We got the arguments last week. Now then, we're going to get the conclusion tonight to see what all of that means. Let's stop and meditate for just a moment on this one point. And that is that all of this started, the priesthood of Christ, back in chapter 4 and we're down about verse 14. Chapter 4 and in verse 14. Now we're down to chapter 8 and heading down in here, and we're still dealing with the priesthood of Christ. That ought to show us really how important the priesthood of Christ is. We talk about the kingship of Christ, how he was king, and rightly so. And we hear that everywhere, all the time. In the denominational world, they talk about it. In the church, we talk about it. I just got through preaching a long series on the kingdom of God and how Christ is the king. And that cannot be overemphasized, how important that is. But how many times do we really stop and meditate and talk about the priesthood of Christ? Very seldom do we talk about the priesthood of Christ. Now, there's a reason for that, and the reason for that is because the very nature of the situation, you don't talk about the priesthood of Christ unless you're trying to emphasize how Christ forgives you in his sins. And so it boils down to that particular aspect of it. But in other things, you're talking about the kingship of Christ, how he rules you, how you ought to obey him, how you should submit to his will, and on you go. But the priesthood of Christ, the high priesthood, after the order of Melchizedek, we really don't zero in too much because it is a specific thing. But I want you to think for just a moment how important it really is. How important it really is. In chapter 1, you remember there that the writer used the kingship of Christ, how that God made him the king above his fellow kings, and about 3 verses is what he used in that aspect of it. Now then, starting in chapter 4, verse 14, all the way down through chapter 8, he's talking about the priesthood of Christ. So this is something that I hope all of us will truly appreciate, the way the writer wants us to appreciate it. Now, we say, okay, what is he trying to do? How does he want us to appreciate the priesthood of Christ? As you go back, put yourself in the first century time. He's talking to the Jewish people. How long had the Jewish people been under the priesthood of Aaron? 1,600 years. They had 81 high priests that had come and died. And so they were just absolutely absorbed in the priesthood of Aaron. So when you talk about the priesthood, why everybody knew what that was. That was the priesthood of Aaron. Now, here the writer comes along and tells them, I don't want you to drift back into the old covenant way of life because of the priesthood. I want to show you how much greater our high priest is than Aaron's high priest were. There's just absolutely no comparison in it. And so he's going over argument after argument after argument, showing how much greater the priesthood of Christ is than the priesthood of Aaron. And so that brings us down to chapter 8 and verse 1. Now as we start out, we can see that this now, it begins the concluding remarks. He said, now in the things which we are saying, what that means is the things that we've been saying from chapter 4, verse 14, all the way down to now. Now, he's saying, here's what I'm wanting you to see. He said, the chief point is this. Out of all of these things, there is one chief point I want you to see in there. Now, let's ask ourselves the question, what does it mean, the chief? The chief point. That word chief literally means that which is chief or principal. That is number one. It is the sum or result of numbers added together. If you add a whole lot of numbers together, You go out, you get all these numbers, you got 20 numbers. You put a line there, and you add it up, and then you have a number under there. Which one of those is the chief number of that whole thing? It's the sum. It's the total. That's the number one. That's the chief of it. Now, that's what he's saying. Now, if you take all of these things, all these arguments I have given you, I've given you the argument about how Jesus Christ is a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. The Aaronic priest died continuously. And so we have a priest forever. They offered that blood sacrifice. Here it is. He's going to offer his own sacrifice. They were not sworn in with an oath, and God swore him in with an oath. And God even swore by himself with an oath to give us a double assurance that this priest is going to be a priest forever. And so on he goes. Now he said the chief point, the number one, the crown, the completeness of anything. When you summarize the whole thing, here is what it is. He said, it is this. And then we have that statement. We have such a high priest. He said, I want you to understand we have a certain kind of high priest. We have such a high priest. That means such a kind, who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. That is the character of our high priest. Now, if you go back and you look at the Aaronic priest, how many of the high priests, they were functioning as high priest, how many of them went to heaven and conversed with God in any form, shape, or matter? They didn't. They were here on this earth. How many of them lived forever? They didn't. They were here. God had given them instructions. They lived and they died. But now he said, here's the chief point that I want you to see. Here is how great he is. We have such a one that has actually gone into the heavens, and he sat down by the majesty of the throne, the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. That is God. Now, Ephesians 1:3 talks about this. In chapter 2, verse 6, talks about it. Hebrews 9. Throughout the New Testament, it talks about Jesus going forth with all authority to be on the right hand of God. So I said, no, this is a chief point that I want us to see in all of this. So now number one here, in chapter 8 and verse 1, Jesus is setting as our high priest. So want to note that. Now I'm going to build a statement upon this thing. He's setting as our high priest. Now, in Hebrews chapter 10, if you want to skip over there, or we can read it up here, here's something that he's going to tell us again. Now, get this. In what chapter will we still be talking about a high priest? See? Is it going to be brought up again in here? Okay. And every priest indeed standeth day by day, ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. That's the Aaronic priest, the blood of bulls and goats. But when he, Christ, when he had offered one sacrifice for sin forever, when he died upon that cross, he sat down at the right hand of God, henceforth expecting till his enemies were made the footstool of his feet. Now, I've skipped ahead, but I want us to note this statement. And we want to drive the point home right here. And that is, Jesus went back and sat down at the right hand of God. And he's sitting there at the right hand of God. And how long is he going to be sitting there as our high priest? How long is he going to be sitting at the right hand of God? Till his enemies be made the footstool of his feet. He's going to be there expecting, anticipating, waiting. This is going to happen. Now, for those of you, you probably got something going off in your mind and ringing a little bell. When you hear verses, and especially when you hear me use a verse that talks about Jesus going and sitting at the right hand of God till all enemies are made the footstool of his feet, what are we talking about? What have we always been talking about before? Now we're talking about the priesthood, but what have we always been talking about before? The kingdom. He's going there to the kingdom. Remember in Acts 2 and verse 34? There it is that Jesus ascended into the right hand of God, and there he began ruling as the Lord and Christ. And so it says that he ascended on the day of Pentecost there. Why Peter tells this, Jesus had ascended into heaven, and he was sitting at the right hand of God, and he was going to sit there till his enemies had been made the footstool of his feet. Now you skip over to 1 Corinthians 15 verse 25, and there it tells you what he's doing while he's sitting there, waiting for his enemies to be made the footstool of his feet. And you remember the word that Paul used? And he must reign. Who reigns? Christ. But what office? What? He's reigning as what? As king. A king is one who reigns. So he's sitting there, starting back when he ascended into heaven, according to Acts 2. He sat down at the right hand of God till all enemies were made. In 1 Corinthians 15:24, he's going to sit there reigning until all enemies are made the footstool of his feet. So now we have Jesus sitting at the right hand of God doing two things. He's sitting there as a high priest, and he's sitting there as a king. Now, we've got this situation from a Jewish viewpoint. From a Jewish viewpoint, what would this sound like? What kind of contradiction would it sound like we are in? Could you be a king and a high priest at the same time under the Jewish religion? No. The high priest had to come from Levi, and the kings had to come from Judah. So it would have been an impossibility. But here in the New Testament, we have this New Testament writer saying that is what he's doing. He's ruling as a king and a priest at the same time. But here's an interesting thing. If you go back to Zechariah chapter 6 and verse 13, Zechariah prophesied that's exactly what would happen when the Messiah came. When the Messiah came, he would sit upon his throne and he would function as a priest on the throne. So what the Hebrew writer is telling him here is he's telling, I'm not saying anything that the Old Testament didn't say. The Old Testament told you that told you this situation. I'm trying to look at it from a Jewish viewpoint. The Old Testament has told you you can't be a high priest unless you're from the tribe of Levi. You can't be a king unless you're from the tribe of Judah. And everybody knows that the same man cannot be a high priest and a king. See, at the same time. Everybody knows that. But at the same time, your Old Testament, your Jewish Old Testament, prophesied that when the Christ comes, that's the very thing he was going to do. He was going to set up on his throne and function as a priest. So he's saying, I'm not telling you anything that the Old Testament didn't tell you. I'm just trying to get you to understand that this is how great this high priest really is. Now, that's the reason, one of the major reasons why he's called a king, a high priest, after the order of Melchizedek. What was it that was so unusual about Melchizedek in the Old Testament? He was a king and a priest at the same time. He was a king there in Jerusalem, and he was a priest there in Jerusalem. He was a Gentile. He wasn't part of the Jewish religion. In fact, the Jewish law hadn't even been given yet. It wouldn't be given for another 400 years. And so here you have a Gentile who was a king and a priest at the same time. Here's one that you have no record of him ever having a beginning. You have no record of him ever having an ending. The only thing that you've got is, there he is. He was ruling in this way. And there is exactly what he says is Christ. Jesus Christ came, and he's a king, and he's a priest, and he's ruling without end. And so you can go back and you can read about it in those verses that we have right there. So now the chief point is this then, that we have this great high priest who has ascended into heaven, sitting at the right hand of God. No priest had ever had that to happen before. Now, what's he doing up there? Well, it says he is a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle. Now, the word minister is a word that means a public officer of high and honorable rank, whether civil, military, or religious. Kind of today, you know, we talk about the secretaries to the president, his secretary. When you say the cabinet of secretaries, which one are you talking about? What does the guy do? Different things. We've got a Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, Secretary of Commerce. That one word refers to any of those high officials on that level. Now, this word right here for minister is not the same word that we normally read, that we point out is the word for deacon or servant. It's not the one of where we appoint ministers or servants in any way. It's a unique word. It means a public officer of high and honorable rank. And the word was used to describe those in the civil government, those in the military government, your generals, so forth, and in your religious government. So now that's what we have. He now is he's a public officer of high and honorable rank. Now, what's he in? Well, he's not in the army. He's in the sanctuary, of the sanctuary here. Now, the word sanctuary is kind of a unique word. That word literally means the holy things. That's what it means. It means the holy things. You say, well, I thought that it meant a building. No, it means the holy things is what it means. Now, we're going to see that how it's used in here, but I just want to make this note right here as we start out. Now, in our nomenclature today, in the English language, when you go in the denominational world, you go into a church building, and they will say, now, in there is the sanctuary. What do they mean when they say in there is the sanctuary?
Inside the building.
No, not just inside the building. It's a certain place inside. If you're going in the sanctuary, what's that?
Place where they worship God.
Place where you worship. We're in the sanctuary right now. So if somebody says, where is your sanctuary in that building? They're talking about this. What do they mean when they talk about when the word is used? How did it get that term? How did the English word get that term? Sanctuary means what we call an auditorium where you worship, because it's considered the most holy part of the building. That's where you worship God. In other places you talk, drink your coffee, or whatever you're doing. That's how that word is used in there. Now, let's get back to the Bible use. We're not interested in how it's used in other ways. I use this as an illustration. The Bible use literally is the holy things. The holy things. Now, what does that mean? Holy. Holy means set apart for God, to be, as it were, exclusively His. How many things does the Bible talk about that's holy, that you can bring up off the top of your head? I'll give you the first one, and that is Christians. They're holy. Now you go ahead and fill in the gaps. Speak loudly. You know these things. Can a mountain be holy? What was it that God said when He called Moses? Said, take off your shoes, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. What does that mean? That means this ground has been set apart for my use. Out of all the bushes on this hill, this is the one bush I have picked out. And I have caused it to become a flame of fire, to draw your attention. And you've come over. Here I am. I'm going to talk to you. Here is a parcel of land. Here's a parcel of ground that is set apart for my use. You can run your sheep on the other part of the mountain. You can wear your shoes anywhere you want to on the other part of the mountain. You can do whatever you want to on the other part of the mountain. But Moses, you've just entered a spot of land that belongs to me. I've set it apart. That's what that means. It is holy ground. Anything else that's holy? I thought of 2 or 3 things, but to be truthful with you now, they're all gone. Okay, tabernacle, but I'm going to get to that. What else would be holy? It would, but I can't remember where it's ever used in the holy, like the Holy Scriptures. We talk about it, and that's true in the way we talk about it, because the Scriptures are they uniquely belong to God, don't they? See? I'm trying to think of something where it's
Weren't the vessels made
holy vessels, but I'm trying to reserve them for right now. There's something else that was in my mind. Christians, a mountain, Holy Spirit, no. That's true, but I'm trying to think of common things. No. Well, forget it. I forgot it. Okay. I had 2 or 3 things as I started out there. I thought you guys would help me, but you absolutely no help at all. You got the point anyway, right? What's that? Okay, yeah, the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day, what is it? Don't you do any work on the Sabbath day. It's a holy day. What does that mean? It's set apart for me. It's not for you to go out and plow or build your house. See? Yeah, a good illustration that's in here. So the word holy means that which is set apart for God. That is the point that it's getting at. Now, when we look at it then, we got sanctuary. Now this word was used to refer to the holy place and the most holy place. Linda, you see why I wouldn't let you bring it up? Now, as you're looking at it, the holy place and the most holy place, that's the sanctuary of the Old Testament. What's some other words for that sanctuary of the Old Testament? What was the first wording nomenclature they called it? The whole thing. No, before that. Everybody knows these things, but I know I'm just throwing it out. The first thing, the tent of meeting. The tent of meeting. That was the first thing that they called it, was the tent of meeting. Then they called it tabernacle. Then they called it a temple. And so all these names were there. But the tent of meeting was the first thing that they called it. Now, call this the tent of meeting. Sometimes they talk about the holy place. Sometimes the most holy place. So we're talking about the sanctuary. We're back there to that tent of meeting there. Now here in this verse, it's talking about heaven. In this particular verse. We're going to try to put this together here tonight so we can see this in here. Now, here it is. He went, look here in verse 1. Where is it he went to sit down at the right hand of the majesty of God? He went into heaven and became a minister of the sanctuary. So what's he talking about now? See, in there. He's talking about a sanctuary that includes heaven. And it can include the church, as you're going to see right here in just a moment. Now, we've got the word true, a sanctuary, and of the true tabernacle. Now, what does true mean? Well, true means real as opposed to false. That is, tell me the truth, tell me what actually happened, not some false thing. It means perfect as opposed to imperfect. If something is really true, if you're dealing with a wheel, is it really true? What do you mean by it? Is it perfectly round and not have any imperfections in it? It's substantial as opposed to unsubstantial. It's something that really exists as opposed to something that doesn't really exist. So that's true. And then the word tabernacle. Now the word tabernacle is the same thing as the sanctuary, except it has a different terminology, a different definition. The word tabernacle literally means, from Thayer, shade, tent, tabernacle. He said made of green boughs or skins or other material. It's used of the tent of meeting and the temple. And in there, I put in there, Peter uses it for the human body. How does Peter use it for the human body? When he says, the putting off of my tabernacle is coming swiftly. It's coming soon. And so the human body is the tabernacle, the place in which you dwell. But of course here, again, it's referring to heaven. That's the true tabernacle that is there. See? When Peter uses, I'm getting ready to put off my tabernacle. Well, all of us are going to put off our tabernacle. Who lives in your tabernacle? Or I might ask, first of all, what is it you put off when you die? It's your body. And you live in your body, don't you? See? That's your tabernacle. Just like you live in your body, then tonight you will go home and go into your house. That'll be your protection. That'll be your shade if it's sunny. It'll be a place to protect you, regardless of what it's made of. That's the idea of tabernacle. Something that you go into, and it's a protective building of some kind or the other. So your body is your tabernacle. Now, let me ask you this. As we look down here at Raleigh, got beard on, all this kind of stuff. Is that really Raleigh? As I look down at him, in other words, have I ever seen Raleigh? Have you ever seen Raleigh? Oh, I know you say, oh yeah, there's Raleigh. Have you ever seen him? What is it you've seen? His tabernacle. You've seen where he lives. See, that really is all that you have seen. Raleigh is a spirit, and his spirit lives within that body. So now, before we go any farther, I want to ask you, what is the real Raleigh Wyatt? Is it the spirit that's in him, or is it his body? What's the real, true Raleigh Wyatt? It's a spirit, isn't it? The body's going to decay, turn back to dust. All it is a house. All it is a house. It's just like if you drive by my house up there, and somebody driving by, and maybe a little kid or something says, there's Lowell. You look up there, I'm not there, I'm in the house. They see the house. There's Lowell. That's where I live. Well, when you see my house, that's where I live, but have you seen me? No. See? It's kind of like a car. How many times have you seen a car go by? And somebody say, who was that? Oh, that was Rod Hilden. Did you see him? No, but I know his car. I know his tabernacle. Now, the reason I'm working on this is because this is going to be the major point of our lesson here as we're getting into this. So you see his car, you don't see him, but you know there went Rod, because you saw his tabernacle, the thing that was enclosing him in this. So now what he's trying to tell us is that now Jesus has gone up to the right hand of God, and he has become the high public official with honor, who is over the sanctuary, that which uniquely, specifically belongs to God, and the true, that which is real, not false, tabernacle, the dwelling place that is there. So that is where he is. He said, which the Lord pitched, not man. Now, whatever this true tabernacle is, it's something the Lord pitched, not man. Now, when we talk about this, which the Lord pitched and not man in here, is that the spiritual? The true, is that the spiritual, or is that the physical? When you talk about the physical tabernacle, who pitched it? That means who built it? Moses, didn't he? He got other people, but he was over it, and it was man who built it. Now, he said here, Jesus now is over the true tabernacle, and it's something that you're not going to be able to see in here. Now, man pitched the unreal tabernacle. However, it is physical, and man can see it with his physical eyes. Now, again, I'm making a point on this because this is the conclusion that he's coming to here. And this is kind of hard for us to see. The physical tabernacle is called a shadow, a copy, a pattern of the real or the true one. Now, the thing that's hard for me, and I think all human beings, we live in a physical world, so what is real to you? What is it that is real to you? It's physical things, isn't it? It's the physical things. That's the things that are real to us. But that's not true. That's not what he's talking about. He's going to show that the real things are the spiritual things. They're the things that you can't see in all of this. Let's look at this tabernacle for just a moment. Here's an artist depiction of the tabernacle. That is the tent of meeting, where God told him, said, here's how I want you to do this. You remember that he said, I want you to divide it into two parts. What was the front part called? As you go into the tabernacle, the holy place. The back part was called the most holy place. He told them how to do it. He told them to build that fence around, which was made out of cloth, curtains that's around there. Now that's what the original sanctuary looked like as he gave it back there to Moses. He told Moses, he said, I want you to build it according to the pattern. Don't deviate from the pattern. See? Roger asked me a good question this week. He was reading over in Exodus, and Moses, God told him, said, here's the way I want you to do it. He told him every little detail about how to build the curtains, make the curtains and the fringes you put on it and the rings you put on it, how you do it. And then Moses turned around a couple chapters later and said, now I built it according to the pattern, and he repeated the whole thing. 2 or 3 chapters in there he repeated it. Now this is important. You build it according to the pattern. I'm going to give you the pattern. And that's what this thing is going to be. Now what he's trying to tell Moses, and what he's going to be telling us, is that God says, I wanted you to build that to teach you a real lesson. I wanted to teach you a lesson of the real things that's going to happen down there when Christ comes. So this tent of the tabernacle is not just a passing thing, but it's a real thing. If I go to the blackboard up here and I start drawing, I say, now here it is, and I want to show you, and I start drawing some kind of a chart that I want you to see. And I say, now I want you to be able to reproduce this chart. And I want you to be able to reproduce it verbatim. Does that mean anything to me? Could you tell that that's pretty important to me to do this? You have any idea why I would be so finicky? I want you to repeat it. I want you to reproduce it the same way I've got it up there. Got any idea why? Because I want you to be able to understand that for a lesson that I'm going to teach you. Has to be that. Otherwise, I'm just up here crying in the dark in here. So there it is. Now, Solomon came along, and David asked God, he said, can I build you a permanent house? And God said, no, you can't, David, but I'll let your son, Solomon, you build a permanent house. Now there's the artist's depiction of the way Solomon built what's called the temple. Now all that is the sanctuary. All that is a tent of meeting, except it's not made out of a tent. See, it's made out of stone. Now, if you could take that building, you go in that building is just exactly on the inside like the tent of meeting was. Just exactly. It's exactly the same thing that you have there. It's just a permanent structure. Now God told them, I want you to have the tent of meeting, and that's why they were roaming around during these 40 years in the wilderness, so you can carry this portable temple, portable sanctuary with you. Once they got in and they settled down into the land of Canaan, in their permanent home, God said, now you can build it out of permanent stuff. So there's the way it stood. Now, you remember that when Herod came along, that he then, now, by the way, all the way up, until Herod came, Solomon's temple was standing there. See, it was there. It really wasn't Solomon's temple. When you want to get back to it, what happened to Solomon's temple? You remember in 586 when Nebuchadnezzar came down? He destroyed it. And so Ezra and Nehemiah came back, and they then began to rebuild that temple. And so they rebuilt the temple. You remember what the people said? Well, let me ask you, how many years was it from the time the temple was destroyed? They went into captivity, and they came back to rebuild the temple. You remember how many years they were in captivity? 70 years. All right, now, some of the people who were young when they went into captivity, they've been in there for 70 years. Now they're old people. They're 80, 90 years old. So they come back, and now then, Ezra and Nehemiah, Zerubbabel is really the one that was over this. Zerubbabel, he lays the foundation out for the temple. What kind of foundation would he lay out? It's going to be exactly the same one that they had before that. So he lays it out, except it's not large and gigantic and great. It's just the minimum. And the old men began to cry. And they said, oh, that's not the way we remember that temple. So now, that happened then, there, and so for about 400 and some years, that temple stood. So, we come down to the time of Christ. Right before the time of Christ, about 14 years before the time of Christ, Herod was king. And Herod wanted to get on the good side of the Jews, so he said, I want to give you Jewish people a gift. I want to remodel the temple. I want to rebuild this temple that you've got and make it a gorgeous building. Now, the Jews didn't believe Herod because they didn't trust him. He was a rascal of all different kinds. They didn't believe him. And they would not go for it until he had cut all of the stones and had them transported down, and all the stones had been cut and marked so that all they had to do was just fit them up like a jigsaw puzzle, and they all fit into place. And once he got all the stones down so they knew that he had all the material, they said, go ahead and do it. So Herod then began to rebuild the temple 14 years before Christ. He rebuilt the temple that was there during Christ's life. You remember how many years he had been building it when Christ, I say 14 years, yeah, I think that was it. You remember how many years he had been building it? And it really wasn't done yet when Christ came and Christ said, you destroy this temple and I'll build it again 3 days. They thought he was talking about this. And they said, this temple has been in building 46 years. Herod's been doing this for 46 years. So Herod's temple was a big temple, is what I'm trying to get at when we get here. So this is the depiction of Herod's temple. Now there in the center, you see that same thing. That same thing was just like Zerubbabel's, just like Solomon's, just like Moses' tent of meeting. It's the same thing. It's the sanctuary. All of the other buildings around there are just buildings that is pasted around it. There's another depiction that you've got of it. There's the Temple Mount, and in the middle of it, there you have it. And that building in there, it's just exactly like all of that. And so you have then this temple or this sanctuary. And what I've been trying to show so far is that sanctuary, that temple, that tabernacle, that holy place, it started back at the law of Moses, came all the way through, and it didn't change. It didn't vary. Even though the outside of it and the buildings around it did get grander and grander and grander, the inside of it stayed exactly the same because he was building it according to the pattern. He said, I want you to see this thing. Now, as we look at this, he's going to call this building, he's going to call it a shadow. That's what he's going to call it. Now, I want us to note when we look at a shadow is not a real thing. It takes a real thing to make a shadow, doesn't it? See? You got to have a real tree before it can throw out a shadow. You got to have a real post. Now, shadows don't show details. They show outlines. When you see a shadow but not the real thing, you only get a picture or an idea of what the real thing really is. It's in there. Now, it's hard for us to comprehend that the real true things are not the physical, but the spiritual things. It really is. It's hard for me because I think of what is really and true. What can you put your hands on? Well, it's what you can see or feel. It's the physical things. But now, again, is the real you physical or is it spiritual? See, is the real you physical or spiritual? Have you ever gone to visit somebody in great pain, or they've just lost a loved one, and you look at them and the tears are flowing and you see their face is just solid white and they're in deep grief, and you look at them. Now, as you look at them, are you seeing the real them? No. But can you tell what the real them looks like on the inside? When you see somebody in deep grief, do you know what that person is going through in their mind on the inside? Yeah. You walk up to somebody else who just won $500 and they're all grins and jumping up and down. You can't see them, but do you know what's going on in the real them? See? Yeah. Because you see the outside. The physical, that's not the real you. The real you is on the inside. And that's what he's going to tell us about this. Now, a shadow shows an outline of the real thing. There's a shadow. What's the real thing? What's the real thing? There's your shadow. A what? A map pen, he says. And he's right. What color is it? The real thing. Yellow. Red. Okay. Now we're in the unknown, don't we? You see. You get the general outline, but you don't see the real thing. Now, there's the real thing up there, but you just saw a shadow. Now then, what is this shadow? A what? A railroad crossing sign. Raleigh thinks he's really smart, doesn't he? What color? What marks does it have on it? See? Okay. Well, not too bad in there. There you go, you see. That's the real thing that's up there. But if you look at the shadow, it gives you the general idea of what the real thing is all about. That's the whole point that he's trying to get in here. And so that really is what he's going to tell us about this. Now here it is. He's going to show us the shadow as you look at it. That's all we can see. That's going to be the tent of meeting or the tabernacle and the sanctuary and all of its furnishings. But the real thing that we're going to be talking about is heaven, the church, blood, high priest, Bible, Lord's Supper, baptism. The real thing is the church and Christ and everything that has to do with it. That's the real thing. But under the old covenant, all we could see was back over here. You see, there's under it was that shadow that you have back over there. Now, I want to stop right there because our time is up. We got quite a bit more to go here on this shadow idea. So I want to leave it right there because he's going to pick it up, and here's what he's going to show. He's going to show that whatever you see in the old covenant with the tent of meeting, with the sanctuary, whatever you see back there is nothing. It's not real. It's not real. It's just a shadow of the real thing that is to come with Jesus Christ in there. But that's where we'll pick up our story now.